Redditors, what is the worst thing you have seen happening during a wedding? I went to a wedding in Cancun this past winter. It was a beach wedding, very pretty and well planned. They only made one mistake. They decided to include small children in the wedding ceremony. The bride's niece and nephew were the flower girl and boy, respectively. The little boy was probably about 3 or 4. Anyway, he comes up into the stage, holding his little basket, leans over, and projectile vomits everywhere. His mom should have gotten a medal for her quick thinking. She was a bridesmaid and was right next to him, and she immediately dumped out a vase of flowers, scooped up a whole bunch of sand, scattered it over the mess to soak it up, and swept it all off the platform with a shawl she grabbed off another bridesmaid. It was cleaned up in seconds. Before the bride reached the stage, she was literally walking up the aisle when it happened. My boyfriend was sitting right next to me, and he completely missed the whole thing. Fully half of the guests didn't even notice it had happened at all. It was one of the most heroic mom moments I've ever witnessed. The best man gave a speech which started out joking about how he and the groom used to do everything together, how they were meant for each other, and then the bride got in the way. Everyone laughed until they realized he wasn't joking. He tore into the bride and confessed his love for the groom, crying about how things would never be the same. He probably had the mic for about 10 minutes before one of the groomsmen finally pulled it from his hands and shouted, "You know what? There's an open bar. Let's just drink enough to forget about all of that." I worked catering as a teenager, so I have seen a bunch. My favorite was when the very drunk best man hid under the table to scare the bride and groom. As they sat down, he jumped out, caught his head on the bride's dress, flipping her backwards, and the groom punched him square in the face, knocking him out onto the table. At my own wedding, we decided to have a wish launch with Japanese paper lanterns. Basically, you light a piece of candle wax and it inflates a large paper lantern and takes off like a hot air balloon. The venue gave us the go ahead to do it off a deck overlooking a lake, and it was beautiful. One lantern though went a little rogue and caught a breeze, drifted to the other side of the lake, and ended up in, of course, a dead tree. None of us could do anything at this point, since it was a little bit away, so we all just watched as it lit the tree on fire. The fire department had to come put it out. When we walked back into the ballroom, the DJ played "We Didn't Start the Fire," and for the rest of the weekend, we were known throughout the hotel as the party that lit the mountain on fire. 15 or so years ago, I was at a distant cousin's wedding where the fiancé, Phil, father of the bride, 2 groomsmen, a bridesmaid and the minister were all volunteer firemen/ents, as well as a good hunk of the attendees. About halfway through the ceremony, everyone's, and I mean everyone's, alarms started going off. This was before cell phones. It was these giant walkie-talkie size pages they wore. It was a fatal car accident a dozen or so miles away, and all hands were needed on deck. In less than a minute, half the church was empty, leaving a shocked bride, ring bearers and organist. It would have been an amusing story if it didn't come to light at the reception that it was the bride's grandparents. My grandfather died the morning of my sister's wedding. The worst thing was watching my newly widowed grandma look at the picture of my grandpa in the chair he should have been sitting in. She was a total champ that whole day, lost her husband of 50+ years, and still made it to her granddaughter's wedding. My mom gathered the whole family up 45 minutes before the wedding. After spending the day with her mom and sister and grandpa's body, she gathered us up and said something like, "It's time for a wedding. We can cry tomorrow, but for the rest of the day, we will smile." My wife's brother got married at a vineyard and the reception was held at the same place. They had an open bar, as much beer or wine you wanted. My wife and I had just had our oldest, so my wife wasn't drinking and told me to have fun. So after several beers, the kegs ran dry and the bar was just down to wine. So I started just pounding glasses of Cabernet. I was beyond trashed and thought to myself that I should go find my wife and check in with her. I found her talking with her parents, so I just stumbled into the conversation and looked at my wife and said, "How's shit going? You doing alright?" She said she was fine, and we all just stood there for a few seconds in complete silence. I broke the silence by saying, "Well, I'm gonna go get more wine," and right before I stumbled away, I reached over and squeezed her right breast and said, "Honk honk." Her parents were not amused. The bride's mother and brother bitching out the bride for God knows what in her dressing room between the ceremony and the reception. The poor bride came out to cut the cake with her makeup smudged everywhere from crying. She tried so hard to pretend to be fine and happy, but you could tell the wind had just been taken completely out of her sails. On the bright side, she and the groom have been happily married for 5 years now, and they just finally got rid of her mother, who had moved in with them after the wedding, because the brother was kicking her out, and moved to Europe together to go on their own adventure. I haven't been to many, but at one the bride's drunk weird father got angry because he paid for a wedding disco and people weren't dancing. Poor bride ended up dancing with her sisters in tears on an empty dance floor to bad pop music she hated. My uncle's third marriage. He showed up late. It was a casual wedding, because once you've done one fancy one you don't really need to do another, I guess, but my new aunt still dressed up a little. He wore cute toffs, a stained t-shirt, and went barefoot because his flip-flops were bothering him. That was actually a pretty good indication of how their marriage was gonna go. It was a long time ago, but the groom's side chick showed up to crash the entire wedding. Nobody knew who she was until she stood up and told everybody she was pregnant with his child. I accompanied a bud to the wedding and I never learned of the fallout that became out of his cousin, the bride, and her ex-fiancé. Went to a massive Greek-Dutch wedding earlier in the month. It was terribly organized, with speeches being after dinner, so there were plenty of people who were fairly liquored up by the time the wedding party began speaking. As the speeches began there was this one drunk woman who was heckling everyone on stage as they spoke, saying all kinds of ridiculous things, but the capstan was during the bride's speech. She was saying something along the lines of "I was told that you marry a man who exemplifies the same qualities as your father does." When this woman yelled out loudly, "Call him daddy for me." Family got pretty upset after that little outburst, especially when the groom burst out laughing. I've talked about this on another thread. Bride's mom insisted on a wedding planner for her daughter's big day. She even paid for it. Bride agrees, but went ahead and planned her wedding herself as the planner, and mom would just go to brunch and get drunk planning. They did nothing and bought nothing. Fast forward to wedding day. I'm in the groom's family and I'm a scripture reader. My little sister and cousin, both 10 years old, were asked by the bride to hand out the programs as the guests arrived at church. Cool, right? Until the wedding planner runs up to the girls 10 minutes before the guests arrived, yanks the programs out of their hands, and chastises them for not being outside to greet the guests as they arrived. It was 90-something degrees out there, a mild spring day for Texas. Now the girls are crying. The older adults are stepping in to handle this because no one knew who she was / why she was here, and someone went and told the bride, who was taking photos before the ceremony. I will never forget seeing my cousin's wife suddenly appear in all her bridal glory, absolutely furious at this woman. She cussed her out, told her to F off and never come back, and then comforted the girls before heading back to photos. My uncles made sure wedding planner left the church, and the rest of the day went great. Girls were fine. Bride's mom got her ass chewed after the honeymoon, and that's that. Well, it's not the worst thing ever, but the worst I saw. It was my wedding, and my mother didn't bother driving 4 hours to make it, and wanted someone to FaceTime her during the ceremony. I really didn't want to. I felt like if she didn't care enough to come, then she could settle for seeing the pictures. My brother talked me into letting her though. So I told her, no talking, mute yourself. She said, of course. Do you think I'm stupid? Well, yeah, actually I do. Right as my daughter walks up the aisle, my mother starts screeching her name and saying, "Say hi to Nana." Then, as I come up the aisle, I hear her begin to screech that no one told her this was going to be a real wedding, and she was throwing a fit saying it was supposed to be a commitment ceremony. What really happened was that she realized literally everyone but her showed up, even my aunt I hadn't seen since I was like 4. So she decided to lie and make a scene. My uncle snatched the phone and hung up, and I didn't speak to her for over a year. Does before count? Cousin is getting married. Her mom is a big snob and somehow thinks she's God's gift to humanity. Couple of days before the huge wedding, a girl persistently is insisting in talking to the priest. She tells him groom and her have been dating for 5 years. She has a 3-year-old kid with him. Groom is not returning her calls. He is hiding. Basically he vanished about 3 months ago. She didn't know about my cousin. Thought she was an ex. Imagine her surprise. So she tells this old priest either groom faces her and tells wife to be the truth or she will at the wedding in front of everyone with the kid. Priest is family friend and is shitting himself. Calls mother of the bride and tells her Momzilla says she'll handle it. Does nothing because everything is set and has to be perfect. Day before the wedding, girl contacts cousin, spills her beans. Cousin is super pissed, inconsolable, crying, feeling like stupid aunt tried to have the wedding. Told her to get married, pretend like nothing is going on, smile and maybe after some time she could forgive groom. Fortunately her daughter had more sense. The wedding was off. She called everyone personally and told them the truth. Her mom pretended to have a heart attack as to not face reality. They couldn't cancel the venue as it was all paid up, so cousin invites everyone still interested in attending. We drank all the booze, ate all the food, even the band played. We had a blast. Idiot aunt did not attend as she was too embarrassed. Cousin got drunk, called her high school ex whom had just gotten divorced, danced with him, and said she was having her wedding night. Couple of years later they got married.